Hi, this is Tracey Tokuhama-Espinosa. Thanks for the opportunity to share some ideas about teacher education. In general terms, I believe that teacher education should be transdisciplinary and research-based. It should be differentiated with a hierarchy of conceptual knowledge, and it should also be mastery-focused. The design of the actual experience should be neuroconstructivist, and I'll explain that a little bit more in detail in a second. And it should also leverage technology in the best way possible to create accessibility to teachers all around the world. I come up with this list based on the structure of backward design, identifying first what it is that we're after in general teacher education, how will we measure progress towards that, and then what do we actually do about it. And I begin with the premise that if we presume, and many do, that the 21st century skills that we look for in students have to do with things like acting autonomously or working with heterogeneous groups or understanding how to identify problems and resolve them, people who embrace complexity and who are critical and creative thinkers, if we're looking for all of this in our students in the education we provide, then we ourselves as teachers have to have all of these characteristics and more. This leads to this first point of transdisciplinary thinking and research-based evidence, how to develop this researcher practitioner in the teaching field. This means taking advantage of information that might come, for example, from neuroscience or from psychological sciences in order to nurture our full understanding of the teaching and learning dynamic. This is based on Leslie Hart's observation that designing an educational experience without understanding the brain is like designing a glove without understanding a hand. I do believe that the brain is the organ of our profession and that teachers need to know a bit more about it than they do today, which means that content area knowledge for teachers should include not only information from education, but also information from neuroscience as well as from psychology. This to me is really basic in teacher education in the 21st century. This leads to the second point. I firmly believe that teacher education should be differentiated. Just as we differentiate in the classroom to meet the needs of different students, we should think about this in teacher education. Different teachers need different things at different times of their career. Reaching mastery should not only be based on this idea of longevity, how long you've been in the field, but also, more importantly perhaps, the depth of the knowledge that you have in core areas of the teaching and learning dynamic. This leads to the fourth point of neuroconstructivism and how do we actually design that experience. And just as we do constructivism within our own classes in which we help students develop core concept knowledge first, and then on top of that we can slowly build higher order concepts, we should do this within teacher training throughout the career as well. This means introducing fundamental concepts in the early years and then different levels of knowledge throughout a teacher's career. In concrete terms, this would look like, for example, the university teacher in training, the person who's becoming a teacher at first, needs to work on fundamentals that will be developed throughout the teacher's career. So in addition to understanding domain area knowledge, pedagogical knowledge should include things like fundamental teacher attitudes. These are preconceived notions that teachers might have about how the brain learns, how humans learn, and this is very important to address in the earliest formation of an individual teacher. Why? Because we know that while things like knowledge and skills, or dates, facts, formulas, conceptual theories about how the brain learns, skills like how to develop a rubric or how to apply a certain strategy, those things are relatively easy to learn. What's really difficult and takes a long time to form are the right attitudes about teaching and learning processes. So if somebody comes into a classroom with a preconceived bias about how humans learn, that's going to take a long time to undo, which is why it needs to be a fundamental core concept that's taught in teacher education. For example, if an individual doesn't accept the idea that intelligence is fluid and not fixed, it's going to be very hard for that good teacher to become great. In a similar way, if a teacher doesn't understand that, yes, they are the decisive factor in the classroom, that just by the fact of social contagion, that teacher can change the weather or the feeling, the climate of their own environment, and that in turn impacts motivation on the part of the students, which in turn impacts learning. So these core attitudes are things that need to happen in the earlier years. Then the teachers move on to novice learning, to advanced beginner learning, and all of these are divided in very much the same way. You have basic information about how the brain learns, and then you also have information about different types of methods of instruction as well as methods of evaluation. You move on then through the track until you become an expert, and then hopefully to reaching mastery in teaching. This more holistic vision, how do teachers grow throughout their professional career, is a more efficient way to approach teacher education. This leads us to how we do this, and I would say in this context, how we teach teachers is just as important as what we teach teachers. I would highly recommend using a flipped classroom format. This means that we make videos beforehand in which we document the key ideas, definitions, concepts for teachers, so that when we work together with them, we can dig deeper into those ideas and we can apply them in authentic contexts for the teachers. I would then recommend that there's a follow-up with those teachers in which we document their progress towards mastery of those core concepts that are being taught. This can be done by doing something as simple as a 3-2-1 reflection, 3 things you didn't know beforehand, 2 things that you're going to continue to research, and 1 thing that you will change about your own practice. And all of this can be documented within an e-portfolio structure so that we can measure progress towards mastery throughout an individual's career. Finally, the last point I would say is that we really have to look at the accessibility of this information. Technology will help us leverage the distribution of information in a different way in which we can improve not only teacher access to the information, but the efficiency with which they learn the information. This moves us away from this question of just quantity, how many people get how many hours of teacher education, but more towards the issue of quality. How do we improve quality access to information based on scientific evidence? With that, I'll stop. Thank you very much for the opportunity.